usual, feel free at any time to get up during the session, get some more soup. Hopefully there's still plenty left over there. And we'll go ahead and get started. Hopefully maybe at the end today we'll have some time for questions. I'm going to try to remember to bring this up at the end, but the last session is scheduled for May 13th. My wife pointed out to me that that is Mother's Day. So we're going to move that one to April 29th. There's 2 sessions in April, but they're still 4 weeks apart, so you still have plenty of time. And most people like to hear the last one. It's kind of important, you know, with Jesus and everything. So we're going to move that to April 29th. So mark that down, and I'll try to remember to remind you. So today we're going to talk about the Patriarchs. We're on the second beat of your places there, the red, which represents the blood of the Patriarchs. Last session we started in the early world, the turquoise. We talked about Adam and Eve. We talked about Noah, the 2 covenants they've made so far. And we ended in the Tower of Babel, where they were building that big tower. And God came down and He confused their language and scattered everything. So before I started, I was going to tell you my story again about my kids. We were driving a little the other day, and I was asking them what they wanted for Christmas. And I asked Isabel, my oldest, she's 7, and she said a horse. I said, what kind of horse? She said that brown one I saw in the magazine the other day. I said, all right. And I asked Hannah, my 5-year-old, what do you want for Christmas? And she said, I want a big, furry, stuffed animal puppy dog. I'm like, all right. And I asked Isaiah, well, what do you want for Christmas? And he said, I want a T-Rex. And I said, what kind of T-Rex? And he said, I want a real one. Of course, then Isabel and Hannah said, well, if he gets a real T-Rex and we get a real horse and a real dog, it's like we're probably going to need lots of horses and dogs to feed that thing. So, all right. So today is about the patriarchs. Patriarch means forefathers, so it's about 4 characters in particular. We got Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. We call these the patriarchs. And chapter 12 starts off with this man Abram. We ended chapter 11 with one of those genealogies, you know, where God's trying to lead us to a specific person, and it ends up with this man named Abram. You know, God had scattered their language. They've covered the earth now, and by this time, you know, this is real point in history. Now we can kind of date this back to about 2000 BC. This is where we're at here. This is when Stonehenge began. So that's what's happening in the secular world here. Egypt is the world power, and people have been starting to worship many, many gods. They worship all these false gods now, and Abraham's family is no different. He comes from a pagan family. But in Abram, God finds a righteous man, and He comes to Abram and He's going to tell him to make this journey. It's 1,000 miles. He's going to tell him to go 600 miles north to a place called Haran, and then 400 miles south to Canaan, which is the promised land. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but 90% of the story here in this gray area, this is the location, takes place in the promised land, takes place in Canaan. And it's about 150 miles long and 50 miles wide. It's about the size of New Jersey. And it was an important piece of land because the Mediterranean Sea was off to the west, and to the north was all those countries like Assyria and Babylon, Rome, and then to the south was Egypt. And this was kind of like the middle. It was kind of like, if you own that middle land, then you kind of own the world. It's kind of like the internet back then. So and it's a land flowing with milk and honey. So this is an important piece of land that God is going to give to His people. So Abram comes along, he makes this journey, comes down into the promised land, and right off the bat here in chapter 12, which is where we're starting off today, God makes him 3 promises. And if you turn to page 12 and 13 of your book, there's a couple of things that shows us. Page 13 shows you Abraham's journey. He starts off in Ur of the Chaldees, which is like modern-day Iraq, and he ends up in the Promised Land. And page 12 is going to show you kind of this blueprint for the rest of the story. These first few verses of chapter 12 give us the blueprint for the rest of the story. God comes to Abram, and He says, the Lord said to Abram, go forth from the land of your kinsfolk and from your father's house to a land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and curse those who curse you. All the communities of the earth shall find blessing in you. So, this is the blueprint. He's making 3 promises in particular here. You see them on page 12. And these 3 promises are going to be upgraded in this part to covenant status. Covenant status. You see there in chapters 15, 17, and 22, it's kind of like one big long covenant where these promises get upgraded. So the first promise is land. He says, I will show you a land. I'm going to take you to a land. That's the promised land that we just talked about. So we're looking for land. That's the first promise. The second thing he says to you, I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great. Do you remember how we ended up the last session when people were saying, we're going to make a name for ourselves? Well, now God's coming to Abram, this righteous man. He's saying, I will make your name great. And name means dynasty. So he's saying, I'm going to make a dynasty out of you. It's going to be a royal dynasty, as we're going to see kings are going to stem from you. So that's the second promise, is the dynasty. And then he says, I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. All the communities of the earth shall find blessing in you. So the third promise is worldwide blessing. So we have these 3 promises: land, royal dynasty, and worldwide blessing. These are 3 things that we're going to be looking through the rest of the story. And you'll see them being fulfilled in the next couple sessions. Egypt and Exodus and Conquest and Judges, they're going to get into the promised land. So we're going to see that one fulfilled through Moses and Joshua. And the second one is the kingdom. And we're going to see that fulfilled when we get to the royal kingdom through David. He's going to start a royal kingdom. And then the third one is going to be fulfilled by Jesus, the worldwide blessing. The whole world is going to be in on this eventually. So Abram, whose name means exalted father, is going to be the father of all these nations here. So we can turn to chapter 15, and we see the first part of the covenant here. See, Abram, he has a problem. He doesn't have any kids. He's an old man. His wife Sarai is old. She's barren. They've never been able to have children. And then you got God coming to him saying, you're going to be the father of many nations. I'm going to give you land. Kings are going to stem from you. You're going to have worldwide blessing. He's like, I don't have any kids. He's a prophet. He's complaining to God here. He's saying, Lord, what good will your gifts be if I keep on being childless? I have as my heir the steward of my house, Eliezer. Abram continued, see, you have given me no offspring, and so one of my servants will be my heir. So he's saying, well, I guess this is it. I don't have any kids, so I'm just going to use my servant here as my heir. And God says, no, your own son shall be your heir. Your own son. And again, Abram's like, okay, I'm an old man. My wife is barren. I don't know what you're talking about here. How will I know? And God takes him, he does something really interesting here. He takes him outside. And he says, look up at the stars and count them if you're able. And we picture Abram, his name's still Abram at this time. We picture him out there counting 34, 35, was that 35? Okay, 1, 2, he starts over. We picture him out there trying to count these stars. But a lot of times we assume things when we read the story. The Hebrew writers are very clever. If you read down a little further, in verse 17, it says, when the sun had set, it was dark. So we have reason to believe here that God took him out in broad daylight and said, look up at the sky and count the stars if you are able. And what did Abram see? Nothing. But were the stars there? Yes. They're there, but you can't see them right now. God is trying to teach Abram that you need to trust me. If you're going to be part of this, you need to trust me. And Abraham, he's really struggling this. And he says, this is where he gives him the covenant of land. And he says, I am the Lord who brought you from the Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land as a possession. Remember, this is the first part of the promise, land. So he's saying, I'm going to give you this land. And he asks, how am I to know that I shall possess it? So he's still like, prove it. And God says, bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old she-goat, and a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. Okay. It doesn't really mean much to us. If I went home today and was like, okay, Kristen, I've been promising you a Hawaiian vacation for 5 years. And I say, this summer we're going to do it. We're going to do it. And she says, how do I know? prove it. And I say to her, bring me a 3-year-old heifer. Is she going to jump up and down like, yes? You know, doesn't really mean much to us, does it? But to the Hebrews, it meant everything. It means that God is going to make a covenant. He's going to make a covenant. It says he brought him all of these, split them in two, and placed each half opposite the other. So a covenant, just to give you an idea of what a covenant meant to them back then, it was very common for two communities to make covenants with each other. For example, say you have one family called the Greens and another family called the Bergs. And the Greens could grow any kind of vegetable you can imagine, but they're kind of wimpy and they're always getting beat up. And the Bergs were mighty warriors, but they couldn't grow a piece of corn. So these two families come together and say, we need to make a covenant. So they draw out the terms of the covenant. They make out the terms of the covenant. And they take this large animal, usually like a cow or a goat or something, and they split it down the middle and kind of open it up like this book here. And then a representative from each side would stand in the middle of all this blood and gore, sometimes halfway up to their knees, and they'd read the terms of the covenant. It's called the walk of death, because basically they'd make an oath, and they'd say, if either one of us breaks this covenant, let whatever happened to this animal happen to me. And if you're a kid, you remember your dad's covenant with a neighbor. It's a big deal. And we still have covenants today. We go to a wedding, right? And what do? The bride's family sits on one side, and the groom's family sits on the other side, and the bride and the groom, they come down the middle, and they read and they make an oath. They read the terms of the covenant, and they make an oath. Thank goodness we don't have the blood and the gore, but that's a covenant. It's an example of a covenant. So this is what God is doing here. He's bringing this animal down. They're making a covenant, and you see, when the sun had set, it was dark, and there appeared a smoking brazier and a flaming torch. This is verse 17. Which passed between those pieces. It was on that occasion the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, your descendants I give this land. So God is making the walk of death. He's going through the pieces here. He's making a covenant with Abram, with his people. But again, Abram and Sarah are really having a tough time with this. They're really struggling with trust. As we see in chapter 16, Sarai comes to Abram and says, look, we're going to have to take matters into our own hands here. We don't have any kids. We're going to have to make this happen. So I want you to take my maidservant here, my slave. She has a slave, an Egyptian maidservant named Hagar. And she says to Abram, the Lord has kept me from bearing children. Have intercourse then with my maid. My wife wouldn't have done this. Have intercourse then with my maid. Perhaps I shall have sons through her. Abram heeded Sarai's request. Listen to the language. This should start ringing a bell. The important thing about this story is you can't forget yesterday's lesson, because everything fits together. You remember Genesis chapter 3? The woman took the fruit and gave it to her husband. Sarai took her maidservant and gave it to Abram. And Abram took her, had intercourse with her, and she became pregnant. The man took the fruit and ate it. So you see something's happening. This stuff kind of reoccurs over and over and over again. They're trying to take matters into their own hands. They don't trust God. So they have a son through this maidservant called Ishmael. And Ishmael would become the father of the Arab nations. The Jews, the Muslims, and the Christians all have the same father Abraham, same guy. All the three monotheistic religions see Abraham as their father. But in Islam, they say that the Jews messed up the text and that Ishmael is the favored son. And it's interesting, the philosophies of the religion, because you think of Ishmael, he is the son of a slave woman. So how does he see Abram? As a master. As a master. And pretty soon we're going to see the birth of Isaac, who is his son. And how does he see Abram? As a father. How do you see God? As a master who will beat you down if you do something wrong? Or as a loving father who loves you? So as Christians, we see God as Father. So we move to chapter 17, and this is where the sign of the covenant comes into play. And the second part of those three promises. This is where the royal kingdom comes into effect. And the covenant of circumcision, chapter 17. And this is where God changes their names. He says to Abram, no longer shall you be called Abram, which means exalted father. And I imagine Abram's getting made fun of a lot. His name means exalted father, and people are like, he doesn't have any kids, he's got this name, and now God's changing his name to Abraham, which means the father of many nations. And he's like, oh no, people are really going to make fun of me now. So he changes his name. He's just telling them how it is here. He says, for I am making you the father of a host of nations. I will render you exceedingly fertile. I will make nations of you. Kings shall stem from you. Remember, royal dynasty. This is the second part of the covenant. But he also says, you know what? You want to be a covenant with me. Remember Genesis chapter 3, what happens after the fall? Loving as God loves is hard. And I'm going to tell you right up front, this is going to be hard. You want to make a covenant with God, it's going to be hard. And the sign of the covenant is circumcision. This is going to hurt a little bit. So there's going to be an outward sign that you are my people. So this is where circumcision comes into play. Every male among you shall be circumcised. So this is the third covenant. We went from one holy couple with Adam and Eve, and the sign of the covenant was the Sabbath, to one holy family with Noah. The sign of the covenant was the rainbow. And then we're one holy tribe with Abraham, and the sign of this covenant is going to be circumcision. God further said to Abraham, as for your wife Sarai, do not call her Sarai, for her name shall be Sarah. I will bless her, and I will give you a son by her. Him also will I bless. He shall give rise to nations, and rulers of people shall issue from him. And Abram fell on his face and laughed. It takes guts to laugh at God. He falls on his face and laughs. So can a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Abraham's 100 years old, and Sarah is like 90. Or can Sarah give birth at 90? And Abraham said to God, we read a little further. Let's go to chapter 18. And Abraham's not the only one laughing here. Sarah, when she finds out about this, she also starts to laugh. It says, now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years, and Sarah had stopped having her womanly period. So Sarah laughed to herself and said, now that I am so withered and my husband is so old, am I to have sexual pleasure? So we got two people laughing. Laughing at God, saying, this is ridiculous. And God comes down and he says, why did Sarah laugh and say, shall I really bear a child, old as I am? Is there anything too marvelous for the Lord to do? Again, the Lord is trying to teach them to trust. And they just don't believe him here. And then at this point, Sarah takes it back. She's like, I didn't laugh. And he says, yes, you did. I love this conversation. I didn't laugh, but he said, yes, you did. So they're going back and forth. Yes, I did. No, I didn't. So she laughs. But who gets the last laugh? God. Because they do have a son. And what do they name him? Isaac. Yitzhak. Do you know what that means? Laughter. God has a sense of humor. So they have a son, and God names him Laughter. And he says, every time you call on your son, you will remember that you doubted that I said I could do what I could do, and I did it. He said, I want you to remember that I can do it. Stop laughing at my plans. Our ways are way different than God's ways. And God's trying to teach him here that you need to trust me. So he says you're going to have a son. And there's a couple minor stories in there about Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah, and you can read those. Don't name your kid Lot. That's what I get out of that. So he does some weird things there. But for the sake of time, we're going to skip over to the third part of the covenant, which is in chapter 22. So they have a son named Isaac. So they have this son that was promised to them. They have a son Isaac. They get him circumcised. He grows up a little bit. And we get to chapter 22, and this is the third part of the covenant, where the third part of the promise gets upgraded to covenant status, the worldwide blessing part. So this is a very important chapter. This is the testing of Abraham. And God comes to Abraham to put him to the test. He calls on him, and Abraham says, ready. Probably regret saying that. And then God says to him, take your son Isaac, your only one whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah. There you shall offer him up as a holocaust on a height that I will point out to you. This is a tough, tough mission. Put yourself in Abraham's shoes. Could you do it? Could you take your son? You waited 100 years. And this is your only son. Your only son whom you love. And God says, go take your son. It's a 3-day journey. You should start seeing some bells going off here in this story. It's a 3-day journey to the land of Moriah. Do you know where Moriah is? It tells us in Chronicles, this is 2 Chronicles, chapter 3, verse 1, the building of the temple. Then Solomon began to build the house of the Lord in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah. Calvary. Ringing a bell? So we have them going to the land of Moriah. You know what Moriah means? God is my teacher. He's trying to teach them something here. You know, this is the testing of Abraham. So he takes them, and I can't imagine what Abraham is going through here. Every step that he takes is one step closer to sacrificing his only son, whom he loves. And again, look at the language in this story. It should ring a bell. Thereupon Abraham took the wood for the holocaust and laid it on his son Isaac's shoulders. So we have the son, the only beloved son, carrying the wood to his own sacrifice in the land of Moriah, which would later be called Calvary. Is this ringing a bell for you here? So Isaac says, here is the fire and the wood, but where is the sheep for the holocaust? Son, Abraham answered, God himself will provide the lamb. God himself will provide the lamb. So add that to your list of things we're looking for. You know, we got land, royal dynasty, worldwide blessing, and now we're looking for the Lamb of God. Looking for the Lamb. So he reached out, took the knife to slaughter his son, but the Lord's messenger called to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham! Yes, Lord, he answered. And I bet you there's never been a faster yes, Lord, in the history of the world. Yes, Lord. You know, calls out to him. And he says, do not lay your hand on the boy, said the messenger. Do not do the least thing to him. I know now how devoted you are to God, since you did not withhold your son, your only son. And then what happens? Abraham looks around and he sees a ram in the thorny thicket. And in Hebrew, there's a different word for lamb and ram. And in this case, it's ram in the thorny thicket. Remember the crown of thorns. So they find the ram. So we're still looking for the lamb. So instead of offering up his son Isaac, he offers up this ram that God provides for him. So again, you see where this story comes from. And think to yourself how important this story is. How important this story is for us as a church in this day and age, for us as a nation, because I think we've fallen under that philosophy of mine, mine, mine. You know, this is mine. And God's saying to him here, everything you have is a gift from me. You know, Isaac would not be there unless God gave him to Abraham. And God's testing him here. And it almost sounds like God doesn't know what he's going to do. He says, you know, God now knows. You know, was God up there taking bets? And I had 2-to-1 odds, says he's not going to do it. 2-to-1 odds. Yeah. No. God knew that Abraham would do it. Who needed to know? Abraham needed to know. If you're going to be the father of many nations, if you're going to be, you know, part of this covenant, you need to understand that you can trust me, that you have what it takes. All that it takes is trusting me. I'll give you everything you need, but you have to use these gifts in the way that I tell you. You know, so he's teaching him something about it. Again, look at our country, look at our church and this philosophy of mine, mine, mine. We need to remember the land of Moriah. We need to go back to Moriah. You know, how often we hear people say, this is my body. Don't tell me what to do with my body. It's not yours. It's God's. Take it to Moriah. Put it on the altar. This is my life. Don't tell me how to live my life. It's not your life. It's God's. Take it to Moriah. It was purchased for a price. This is my money. Don't tell me how to spend my money. It's not yours. It's God's. Take it to Moriah. Put it on the altar. You know, these are my children. Don't tell me how to raise my children. They're not your children. They're God's. Take it to Moriah. You know, this is my bride. Don't tell me how to treat my bride. It's not your bride. It's the bride of Christ. Treat her as the bride of Christ. You know, we need to remember that everything we have that is good and true is a gift from the Father. And we need to use those gifts for His glory, for His kingdom, and the way that He intends. We need to put aside our own agenda and pick up the agenda of God. The only thing that you can claim that is yours is your sin. That's all that you can claim. That's all that's really yours. Everything else is a gift from the Father. And Abraham learns this lesson well. He learns to trust. And the Lord messenger called to him from heaven and said, I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you acted as you did, and not withholding from me your beloved Son, I will bless you abundantly and make your descendants as countless as the stars of the sky and the sands of the seashore. Your descendants shall take possession of the gates of their enemies, and your descendants of all the nations of the earth shall find blessing. All this because you obeyed my command. Good things happen if we just trust the Father. And we need to put our trust in God. And that's the third part of the covenant here. So this covenant is fulfilled. The land, royal dynasty, and worldwide blessing. So Isaac grows up, and he gets married to a woman named Rebekah. And they have two sons by the name of Esau and Jacob. Esau's the older one, Jacob is the younger one. They're twins. And when Rebekah was pregnant, it was like they were fighting within her womb, and she consults the Lord. And in chapter 25, verse 23, the Lord answers her and says, 2 nations are in your womb, 2 peoples are quarreling while still within you. But one shall surpass the other, and the older shall serve the younger. So God's telling Rebekah right up front, the second one is going to be the favored son. Jacob is the second one. So Rebekah favors Jacob. Isaac favors Esau, the older one. And Esau's not real bright here. He has the birthright, because he's the oldest, and he usually the blessing also goes to the oldest. There's 2 different things here. They're very similar, but you have a birthright and a blessing. And usually they go together to the oldest son. The birthright represents more of kingship, and the blessing represents more of priestly vocation. So you have like a priestly blessing and the king birthright. And right away, Esau sells his birthright to Jacob. One day he comes home and he's just famished. He's starving. And Jacob's cooking this food. It smells really good. And he's like, give me some food. And Jacob's like, well, sell me your birthright. He's like, okay. And in the New Testament, we read that this is a profane thing. He sold the birthright for a single meal. We call this something profane. When you sell something sacred for something temporal, something temporary. And we do the same things in our culture, in our world. Think of a husband that sells his marriage for an evening of pleasure. Or the woman who destroys her own child for a few years of convenience. These are profane things where we choose something temporal over something sacred. So he sells him the birthright, but Jacob's not satisfied with that. He wants the blessing as well. He's after the blessing. And he goes about it in a very mischievous way. The name Jacob means the deceiver. He's a trickster here. And Rebekah wants Jacob to have the blessing. And again, we see a distrust in God. God told Rebekah that Jacob would get the blessing, but she doesn't trust him. She's going to take matters into her own hands. So Isaac's getting old. He can't see anymore. This is a few years before cataract surgery. And he can't see. The world is dark and dimmed for him. And so he's about ready to die, and he tells Esau to go get me some food so I may bless you. And Esau goes out to hunt, and Rebekah hurries and pulls Jacob aside and says, here, I'm going to make this food, bring it into your father, pretend that you're Esau so that he blesses you instead. And she puts the covering of the firstborn, because Esau's a hairy man and Jacob's a smooth man. So she puts the skin of the firstborn on Jacob, and we are all covered with the skin of the firstborn. Again, another analogy to we all have Jesus on us. But Jacob goes in and deceives his father, and he gets the blessing. We think to ourselves, was what Jacob did right? No, it wasn't right, but was it effective? Yes, he got the blessing. You can't take it back. But there's going to be consequences, and if there's something we learn in the Patriarchs, it's that what you sow is what you reap here. And the Hebrew writers, they're not going to just tell you the consequences, they're going to show you. And you're going to see that Jacob's going to run into all sorts of trouble now. He has the birthright, he has the blessing, and God is with him. But he's going to have some consequences here. And right away Esau finds out about this, and he's mad. And Rebekah says to Jacob, you got to get out of here. Your brother's going to kill you. So he heads up north to some relatives up north. And he's exiled out of the land for about 20 years. 20-some years here, he's gone. And while he's up north, he meets Rachel. He falls in love with this beautiful girl named Rachel. And it's the daughter of his uncle Laban. And at first Laban really likes Jacob. They seem to get along really well. and he's going to work for Rachel for 7 years to take her as his bride. And Jacob goes about proposing or asking his father for Rachel's hand in a very weird way, and I wouldn't have done this. If you ask me, Jacob's not the brightest bulb on the tree here. This is what he says to Laban, his uncle. "Give me my wife, that I may consummate my marriage with her." And in the RSV version, it says, "Give me my wife, that I may go into her." I remember asking my father-in-law for permission to marry his daughter. It's very, very scary time for me. This is a man who has 5 daughters. Kristen was the third one, but she was the first to get married, so I had to break this guy in. And I had it all planned out. I was going to propose on February 16th, and on February 15th, we were supposed to go to this wedding on her dad's side. And I figured, well, it's kind of my last chance to ask him, and there's going to be this wedding, there's going to be lots of people there, it's going to be noisy, might have a few drinks in him, he'll be loosened up a little bit, I had it all planned out. But it turned out he didn't go to the wedding. And so we went back to their house afterwards, and we're sitting around the living room, and I know I got to propose tomorrow. I can't ask him in front of everybody here. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And then my opportunity arose. He went down into the basement to put wood in the furnace. And this isn't a fixed-up basement. This is a dark, musty, dungy basement, and he's putting wood in the fire. And I'm shaking like a leaf. I go down there, I followed him down, and he probably wonders what I was doing. And I asked him, I said, I plan on proposing to Kristen tomorrow. I wanted to have your blessing. And I thought I was going to have to work for 7 years. I honestly thought he was going to say no. He wasn't ready for that. And, he started asking all these questions. And I'm like, just say yes or no. Eventually he said yes, but I guarantee you, if I would have used Jacob's technique and said, "Give me my wife that I may go into her," I would have been the next piece of wood thrown on that fire. I guarantee you. And if you think that's bad, if anyone ever wants to propose to one of my daughters and ask my permission, they're going to need a letter of recommendation from the bishop. I've already decided. So they plan this big wedding, and they have a wedding, and Jacob wakes up the next morning and he rolls over, and it's Leah, Rachel's older sister. I don't know. You think he would have figured that out before then. But Jacob wakes up and he realized he's been Jacobed. He's been deceived. And he goes to Laban and he's like, "Well, I worked for Rachel. Why have you duped me? Why have you Jacobed me?" And again, what you sow is what you reap. And Laban goes right to the heart of the matter. And he says, "I don't know how it is where you come from, but here, the older comes first." You know how you deceived your father in the darkness? You know how you put yourself before the older? Gotcha, So, again, what you sow is what you reap. So, he ends up with Leah, but then he says, "All right, well, if you work for me another 7 years, you can have Rachel too." So you got 2 wives, sisters. Don't know how that worked out. I've seen sisters tear each other's eyes out over a blouse. But these 2 women are married to the same man now. So he's working for Laban for all these years, and this is where the 12 tribes of Israel come about. You've heard that term, the 12 tribes of Israel. These are the 12 sons of Jacob, and they come from 4 different women. Leah is not as loved as Rachel because she's not as pretty. So God feels sorry for her. So the first 4 sons come from Leah, and Rachel's not able to have any kids. So you got 4 sons from Leah. Rachel gets upset and says, "I'm not having any sons, but I have this maidservant here. Go into her and have kids for me." So Jacob prays about it and says, "Okay." So he has 2 sons with her, and in the meantime, Leah goes barren. So she takes her maidservant and says, "Here, go into her and have sons for me." So, okay, he has 2 sons with her, and then Leah can have kids again, and she has 2 more sons and a daughter. And then finally, Rachel is able to conceive, and she has a son by the name of Joseph. The 11th child is Joseph. And later on she'll have another son by the name of Benjamin, the 12th son, but shall die in childbirth, giving birth to this child. So there you have it, the 12 sons of Jacob. And sooner or later, Jacob, ever since that whole proposal thing, Jacob and Laban's relationship's getting a little rocky. So Jacob one day just decides to take off. He's like, I'm going back to the land. I've been here for 20 years. I'm taking my wives, my children, my livestock, all my things. And in the middle of the night, he leaves, takes off. He's going back. But he's still afraid of Esau. You know, Esau's still back there. He doesn't know if he's still upset, if he's still mad. So he's kind of leery about it. And a funny thing happens on the way there. In the middle of the night, he gets into this fight. It's in chapter 32, the struggle with an angel. It's just really weird. And all night he struggles with this angel. And in the morning they wake up, and they're still fighting, and then it says, when the man saw that he could not prevail over him, he struck Jacob's hip at the socket, so that the hip socket was wrenched as they wrestled. Then the man said, let me go, for it is daybreak. But Jacob said, I'll not let you go until you bless me. What is your name? The man asked. He answered, Jacob. The man said, you shall no longer be spoken of Jacob, but as Israel, because you have contended with divine and human beings and have prevailed. That's what Israel means. And this is a lesson here, again, that Jacob needs to learn, that his struggle is not with man. It's not Esau that his struggle is with. His struggle is with the Lord. Again, we need to come to grips. We need to trust the Father. And his struggles that he's having with, his doubts that he's having, are because he doesn't trust the Father. And so he needs to learn to trust here. But he finally meets up with Esau, and they get along, it's okay, everything works out good. And you have these 12 sons now. And this is where the story kind of shifts over to focus on Joseph, who is the 11th son. And Joseph is Jacob's favorite. Why do you think he's his favorite? Because he's the firstborn of Rachel. He loved Rachel, right? So Joseph is the firstborn of Rachel, so he gets this special treatment. He gets the big robe, the Technicolor dream coat. You know, everybody keeps saying Donny Osmond. I don't know what that is. I'm too young, I guess. I haven't seen the play. I'll have to go see it, but I guess there's a whole musical about it. But he has this big long robe. It signifies how special he is. And this makes his other brothers a little mad, a little jealous. He's kind of a dreamer. And he has these dreams. And one day he starts telling his brothers about his dreams. And the dreams kind of can be interpreted that all of his brothers and even his parents are one day going to bow down to him. He's like, I don't know if it's pizza or what I had. I was reading this stuff. And his brothers are like, what a brat, you know? What a little brat. He thinks we're going to bow down to him. He's got another thing coming. So one day, Joseph's coming out to bring food to his brothers, and they see him coming from a distance. You know, and he's wearing his big coat. And one of the brothers, Judah, the fourth, says, let's kill him. Let's kill him. You know, and Reuben, kind of the oldest, kind of speaks up and says, no, don't kill him. Let's throw him in a pit. We'll think about it here first. Thinking maybe he'll rescue him out of the pit. But in the meantime, this band of Ishmaelites comes driving by. Remember Ishmael? The Ishmaelites are driving by. There's a caravan. They're going down to Egypt. So they come up with the idea, well, let's not kill him. What profit is that? We'll sell him. You know, we'll make some money out of this. We'll sell him to these Ishmaelites. We'll put some blood on his clothes. And just bring that back to Dad and say, well, you know, wild animal got him. You know, and that's what they do. And Jacob is just heartbroken. He is just torn apart. He says, I will never get over this. His whole life. He loved his son so much. So Joseph gets stripped of his royal robe, and he gets sold into slavery, and he goes to Egypt, and he ends up working for Potiphar, this man named Potiphar. And he's a good man. He's a humble man. He's a righteous man. Joseph, that is. And Potiphar's wife comes and takes a liking to him. And she says, come lie with me. And Joseph says, no, I cannot sin against my God. I cannot sin against Potiphar. I won't do it. And she rips her own clothes. She goes to Potiphar and says, he tried to force himself on me. So what happens? He gets thrown into prison. You know, things are just not working out for Joseph here. You know, now he's in prison. You know, he's all alone. And pretty soon there's two other guys get put in prison. And one day they're looking really gloomy. And Joseph says to them, what's wrong? And they're both like, well, we had these dreams. We don't know what they mean. At this point, if I was Joseph, I probably would have said, oh, you had some dreams. You know, I've had some dreams of my own. Let me tell you, keep them to yourself. You know? But he doesn't say that. He says, you know, the interpretation is with the Lord. Tell me your dreams. And the one guy tells him his dreams. He said, well, the interpretation is that you're going to get restored to your post. The Pharaoh's going to come and restore you back to your post. So the other guy's like, oh, let me tell you my dream. Let me tell you my dream. And tells him, he's like, oh, well, you're going to get killed. Oh, shoot. Let me tell you a different dream. So that's what happens. The one guy comes, gets restored to his post, and the other guy gets killed. And before the guy that got restored leaves, Joseph says to him, now look, don't forget about me. I'm still here. I'm still in prison. Remember me. But what happens, he forgets about him. So a lot of time goes by, and then all of a sudden the Pharaoh has a dream. And he wants to know what it means. And they're looking for somebody to interpret his dream. And all of a sudden the guy remembers that guy in prison. He knows how to interpret dreams. And then he brings him to the Pharaoh, and he interprets the dream, which the dream can be interpreted to, there's going to be 7 good years, 7 fat years of plenty, followed by 7 years of severe famine. And the Pharaoh's like, yes, that's it. That's the dream. That's the interpretation. I need somebody to organize an effort for me here. Who better than Joseph? So Joseph goes from being in prison to the second most powerful man in the land. And just as he said, they have 7 good years, and then the famine hits. And there's these really hard times, and nobody has any food. And the people of Egypt are saved because Joseph has organized and saved up all these food for the bad years. And people from all over start coming for help. And pretty soon, this band of men come, and it's Joseph's brothers. They're starving. They need some food. They're coming to Egypt for food. And they don't recognize Joseph. He's kind of in disguise. He sees them coming, but he wants to test them a little bit here. He wants to see if their hearts have changed. Remember, they sold him into slavery, and they want to know. He wants to know, have they changed? So he tells them, do you have any more brothers? And they're like, yeah, we have one more smaller brother, our youngest brother Benjamin, back home with our father. And he said, well, go back and get your brother. Bring him here. And Jacob does not want to let that one go. They really have to talk Jacob into letting this son go with them back to Egypt. But they do, and they bring him back. And what he does is he kind of sets up Benjamin a little bit. He puts something in his pocket and catches him and throws him in prison, saying, wow, he's trying to steal from us. And he wants to see how the other brothers will react. How will they react to the youngest? John Paul II said that the way you can to view a culture, to see how culture is how they treat the weakest. How do they treat the weakest? He wants to know what their attitude is towards the youngest. And they throw Benjamin in prison. What happens? Judah, the one who sold him into slavery, the one who wanted to kill him, speaks up and says, no, take me instead. Don't take my father's youngest child. I can't do this to my father again. I love my father. I love my brothers. I won't let this happen. And he takes his place. And at that time, Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. And they are probably in shock. Like, oh, he's going to kill us. He's going to kill us. Please don't kill us. And Joseph says, no, I forgive you. What you meant for harm, God meant for good. Joseph understands the ways of the Lord. What you meant for harm, God meant for good. He sent me here ahead of you to preserve our lives, to preserve our family. So Joseph saves them, and they have this big family reunion, and they go back and they bring Jacob with them. He goes back, he has a reunion with his father who thought he would never see his son again. And they all go back to Egypt because Joseph is this big, powerful man in Egypt now, and they bring your whole family. So they all end up going down into Egypt. See this red line right here? They went down into Egypt. And they're going to be there for 400 years. Because the Pharaoh dies, another Pharaoh dies, and Joseph's not so known anymore, and all of a sudden these Hebrews get put into slavery, So they're going to spend 400 years down there, but it's only going to take us like 45 minutes to go through that part, so don't worry. So at the end of the Patriarchs here, they all get back together, they're all doing well again, and Jacob starts handing out the blessings. Remember the birthright and the blessing. Pretty soon, that birthright and the blessing, they're going to get split. They're going to get split. David is going to be the king. But the Levites, as we're going to read in the next part, they're going to end up being the priest. The Levitical priest, you've heard. So the blessing and the birthright are going to split into 2 different sons. David comes from the line of Judah, and the blessing is going to go to the Levites. But in the end, Jesus is going to reunite them. He is the King, the Lord, the Savior. He's also the great priest. And Jesus is going to bring that birthright and blessing back together. So at the end here is just Jacob handing out these blessings. And who does he give the blessing to? You have these first 4 sons. You have Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. And we know that Reuben, who is not sandwiched in between the other 2, it's a joke. He's the firstborn. He doesn't get the blessing. He doesn't get the blessing because in an earlier chapter, you'll see that he went up and tried to sleep with his father's concubine, which is a political move for power. So he doesn't get the blessing. Then you have the second two, which is Simeon and Levi. And we know that Levi doesn't wear the pants in the family. These are Jeff Cavins jokes, so not mine. So they don't get the blessing either, because in an earlier chapter, you'll see when they were in Shechem, that place called Shechem, they raped their sister Dinah. The men of Shechem raped Dinah. And they were upset, which they should be. But what they did was they tricked them. They used the ways of the Lord, and they tricked them into a covenant. They said, look, if you want our women, then you have to make a covenant with us. And so they circumcised them, and while the men were healing, they led a revolt and killed all the men of Shechem. And it disgraced Jacob. So they didn't get the blessing. The blessing falls to the fourth, which is Judah. And Judah wasn't so perfect himself, as you remember. He's the one that wanted to kill Joseph. He's the one that sold him into slavery. But the difference is, he comes around, you know. In the end, he's the one that stands up. He learns the lesson. He says, I will die. Take me instead. So Judah is the one that gets the blessing. He says, you, Judah, shall your brothers praise. Your hand on the neck of your enemies. The sons of your father shall bow down to you. Judah, like a lion's whelp, you have grown up on prey, my son. He crouches like a lion, incumbent, the king of the beasts. Who would dare rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Judah. So Judah receives the blessing. Judah, right here on your timeline. Judah, that's the seed. The seed is going to come from the line of Judah. So now we have these 12 tribes, and they're lost in the land. So 400 years, we're going to go into Egypt and Exodus on our next session. But there's a lot we can learn here from the patriarchs, from all of them. All of these patriarchs struggle with trusting God. They all go through their own struggles. They all go through their own hardships. I mean, Isaac was on the altar, for crying out loud, you know, ready to be sacrificed. Jacob was exiled for 20 years. He had all sorts of problems that he had to deal with, you know. And Abraham, you know, he was just a portrait of patience and trust. You know, he had to go through all of those things where, you know, this just does not seem like it's going to happen. It just seems like a hopeless cause. I'm 100 years old. There's no way this is going to work out. And he has to come around and learn to trust the ways of the Lord. And Joseph images Jesus probably more than any other character in the story. Think about it. Both Joseph and Jesus were deeply loved by their father, but hated by some of their brothers. Both of them were betrayed by people close to them. They were both stripped of their royal robe, sold into slavery. Both of them seemingly forgotten by God, imprisoned, wrongly accused for something they did not do. And their missions, very similar. You know, Joseph is sent ahead of his people to teach them forgiveness and to save them from starvation. Jesus is sent to forgive the sins of the world and save them from death. Do you see the similarities between Joseph and Jesus? They both went through their Good Fridays. They both were in a situation. You know, Joseph in that prison cell had to have thought, why have you forgotten me? Why have you forsaken me? They were both humble and meek, upright men. They did what was right, and it got them into trouble. You know? And we all need to relate to the same thing here in our time, in our lives. You know, sometimes things look dark and bleak. Sometimes we have to ask ourselves, do I still trust God? Even though it's Good Friday, do I still trust that Easter Sunday is coming? No matter how hopeless things look. You know, as a church, you know, I love the Catholic Church. I just love this church. I can't even begin to explain to you the gift that the church is for me. And all I want to do is give it to people. You know? But I can't. Can't give it to them. And all you can do is point them to it. All you can do is point them to it. And in recent years, the Catholic Church has struggled. You know, we've gone through some dark times. You know, when people hear the word Catholic, they don't think of, you know, holy, devoted, prayerful people. You know, they think of abuse crisis. They think of people going through motions. They think of people with no passion and purpose. And, you know, it has to change. And I believe that it will. I believe it will. I think it's, you know, you got to go through Good Friday to get to Easter Sunday. And I think something big is about to happen. I think things are already starting to change. Changes are on the horizon. And if you go to this Matthew Kelly retreat, I'm going to end with a song here. If you go to this retreat, you'll hear this song by Elliott Morris played at the retreat. And it's called Up From the Bottom. It's called Up From the Bottom. And it's right after they tell you all the research that they've been doing there at Dynamic Catholic. And there's a bunch of forms on your paper there. There's a little booklet that looks like this, with some statistics that tell you a little bit about Dynamic Catholic. But at this retreat, they'll tell you they've been spending all this money on all this research, and they'll just tell you how it is. We got a lot of problems. 70% of Catholics don't go to Mass. 85% of confirmation students leave the church before they turn 30 years old. 85%. But they've taken this research, and they're going to do something about it. They're trying to find ways to bring people back, to re-engage disengaged Catholics, and they're creating these world-class programs. Like confirmation is their first one, and there's some information. I didn't have enough of these for everybody, but it tells you about the program they're doing for confirmation, and it brings a lot of hope because what they're doing is they're bringing this program using modern technology that these kids are already using, and it implements the parents and it implements their sponsors so they can kind of learn the faith together. And it's really exciting, what they're putting together. Really exciting. And then they play this song for you. It's called Up From the Bottom. Elliott Morris, and he plays it live, acoustic. If you go to the retreat, you'll hear this song, and it kind of brings it home that, yes, we've gone through some dark times, but, a revival is on the horizon. Good things are happening. Things are beginning to change. So this is called Up From the Bottom.
Sometimes
Again, that's Elliot Morris, just another sample of his music that you will hear at the Matthew Kelly Retreat if you're able to go. So there's a bunch of these on the tables. This is more information about the Matthew Kelly Retreat. It answers a lot of questions that we've been given. You know, what the schedule of the day is like, what you'll kind of learn, what ages it's for. And in here, there's also a list of names and numbers. These are the people in our parish that are selling tickets. So if there's somebody in particular you can contact, or you can just call the parish office. But everybody that has tickets is on this form so that you know who has tickets available. So take one of these with you, pass it around, invite people to come. Again, we're hoping to get it filled. And then the other thing I wanted to invite you to, there's these flyers on your tables. This is our speaker coming on December 14th. His name is Michael Walsh. And his title is Becoming Spiritually and Physically Fit. You know, this is the time of year right after Christmas where everybody starts making these New Year's resolutions. You know, this year I'm going to get in shape. And the resolution usually lasts a couple of weeks or whatever. And, you know, what does this have to do with Christianity? What does it have to do with morality? And I'll tell you, if your motivation to get in shape is you just want to look good or you want to live to be 100 years old, then you're probably going to fail at your mission. But if you're able to offer it up, remember taking things to Moriah, put them on the altar. You know, offer them up as a sacrifice for somebody else. You know, look at it as a social justice thing. You know, we're in a healthcare crisis. You know, we're spending way more money than we have on healthcare. And 90% of those costs come from preventable diseases. So the first step to curing our healthcare in this country, making sure that everybody has affordable healthcare, is taking care of ourselves, taking care of our own bodies. Remember, God needs you here now. So don't get in shape because you want to live forever. Get in shape because you're willing to fight the fight. You want to do what God wants you to do while you're here. You want to have energy, you want to have passion, you want to have purpose. So that's kind of what the topic is. And remember, our kids are in all kind of sports. They're doing all kind of things. And we want to teach them about God. Well, you can find God in those things. That's where I found him, you know, playing sports, you know, being physically active. So he's going to kind of bring the two together. How does our physical well-being interact with our spiritual well-being? So it's for you, your whole family. Bring your kids there. Bring your teenagers. You know, go yourself. Listen to what your teenagers are listening to. It's going to be during PRE, so all of our high school, junior high kids are already going to be there, but we hope you'll come too. So please come and invite people. There's no cost there to attend. We'll have the punch and cookies afterwards. There will be free will offering. And we're going to give away another Matthew Kelly ticket. So wanted to invite everybody to that as well. All right, let me make sure. Oh, we got and just a reminder, we're changing the last date from May 13th to April 29th. So, all right, we're going to draw 2 tickets here. Father Tim, you want to come draw? I figure Father Tim has the touch, and he will be able to pull out exactly who needs to be at this retreat. John Wood, Melody Reinhardt. One more. Jan S. All right. She's got a wealth. All right. So we do have tickets available. I know Rodney Elkert has tickets. If anybody wants to purchase, Kelly Depinet has tickets. And I think that is everything I was going to say. Today only. You know, Christmas is coming up. What better gift to give somebody than passion and purpose, you know, a reason to live their faith. So it's a good opportunity to buy tickets at this time. If anybody buys 5 or more today, then you get this free DVD set. It's worth $100. So this is a chance if you're thinking about buying a bunch of tickets, this would be a good opportunity, and you get another Christmas present too. So this is a collection of almost all of his material from from a few years back, so this is a good collection to have. So, okay, thank you everybody for coming. Appreciate your time, and we'll see you at our next session. I think the next session is January 8th, I believe. Oh, hold on. I always forget something. I wanted to tell you too, our job as parents is to teach this to our children, right? And our kids love movies, and there are some great movies that tell these stories. VeggieTales has a lot of them. There's a VeggieTales called Abe and the Amazing Promise. There's one called The Ballad of Little Joe. And there's a really good movie called Joseph, King of Dreams, which also tells the story of Joseph. So there is a Bible timeline for kids too, and you can see that in the resource guide. So they make a lot of materials to teach it to your kids, so I hope you will.